This is the best-selling Android phone in the world. It's an even bigger deal than you think. If you look at the annual smartphone sales charts, basically every single year you'll see the exact same trend. The entire top 10 is basically iPhone, 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 but then a Galaxy A series.
What?
Specifically the Galaxy A10 series. And then a little while later, the Galaxy A0 series. And while obviously one major takeaway from this list is, damn,
son,
Apple sells a lot of iPhones. In a way, it's Samsung's achievement that's the even more surprising one. Because remember, Apple only makes 4 models a year. Samsung makes about 50. They have A models, S models, M models, Z models. So for just one of those 50 models to come in 4th place, to sell 30 million units on its own is absolutely astronomical. But on the face of it, doesn't really make any sense. Samsung holds massive launch events for their flagship phones. They fill up vast spaces with reporters from every corner of the globe. But this Galaxy A14 doesn't even have a launch event. Or even a trailer in the West. You can only find quick summary videos on Samsung's India or Malaysia or Thailand pages. And yeah, sure, some of these have some pretty impressive view counts, but all you have to do is to look at the comments to realize that none of this is organic reach and no one actually cares about them. So why are these A-series phones by far Samsung's best-selling, specifically this A10 series of them? And just before we get into it, we're going to start a battery test of the Samsung A14 versus the iPhone 14. So the first, most obvious thing that makes this so popular is price. This A14 is around $150 outright, including delivery, and that's actually quite impressive considering what you get. A 6.6-inch 1080p display, the very latest Android 13, 50-megapixel main camera, huge 5,000 mAh battery, and yeah, sure, some nice thick borders around the outside of the screen, but enough fundamentals such that when I handed this phone to my fiance and asked her how much she thought it was, she said 400. And it's only when I started setting the phone up that I properly realized how they've got to this price. I kid you not, when I first booted it up, I was assaulted by recommended apps. There were 3 separate pages of supposedly free goodies that the phone wanted to install for me. It asked my gender and my age to try and target its recommendations, and even went as far as to tick yes to half of the apps by default. Samsung will obviously be charging all of these app companies to feature on these pages, probably taking extra money for the app to be selected by default, which is great for them because it takes the pressure off needing to make money off the hardware itself. And it's a pretty standard trick for cheaper phones like this, but it is kind of crazy that they're allowed to just cover up very clearly sponsored apps by literally describing them as if they're essential to the user. But there's one more, even subtler way that Samsung is able to keep this phone so cheap. When you first look at this phone, it very much looks like this is running Samsung's One UI skin, right? The same skin that its flagship Galaxy S series phones are running. But look a little closer and you see this is not the same One UI 5 that the S23 Ultra uses. This is One UI Core 5. Which is a nice way of saying we've stripped out all of the nice-to-have features that we don't think are completely necessary and left it plain. And this saves them even more money. It means that every time there's a software update, for example, the company only has like a third of the features that they need to go through and manually tweak for that update. And also, because it is so simple, there's just less that can go wrong, which helps to minimize the amount of time that Samsung spends fixing these budget phones. And regardless of how irritating all of this is, it's what's allowed Samsung to hit this $150 price point. And naturally, the more affordable the phone is, the more it's going to sell. But there are loads of cheap phones out there, so it still doesn't fully explain why this one. Well, design has a surprisingly big part to play. See, when you're choosing the design of your phone, the decision is not just how do we make each device as cool looking as possible. The design is also the single most important factor determining how people perceive where that model is positioned within your lineup. And there's 2 different ways that you could go here. One route is the Apple route, where your more affordable phones are very clearly differentiated in design from your flagship phones. I mean, Apple makes absolute sure that no one who's looking at the iPhone 14 Pro Max, for example, is even going to consider getting the $400 iPhone SE. They've designed them to look like incomparable experiences, and that if you want the best, you've got to pay for the best. Which is also why they only use matte finishes on their Pro models. It doesn't cost them more to do, and they might actually sell more phones in total if they use these slick matte finishes on every one of their phones. But they don't want that. They want fewer people to buy their very highest end models. But Samsung does the opposite. The entire appeal of this A-series set of phones is literally, this is like the S-series on a budget. They very closely match their cheaper phones to their more expensive phones in terms of design language. They make sure they still have multiple cameras like the S-series does. They make sure that even the cheapest phones get a nice matte textured back. And this makes their entire lineup a very smooth sliding scale, where at every $30 to $50 price increment, there's a new option with slightly better better features. And this kind of structure means that most people are going to tend to start looking somewhere around the mid-range for their phone, and then just scale up or scale down from there depending on what they decide they need. And more importantly for this video, it makes their entry-level phones like the A14 feel like the best value. It's Samsung effectively spending some of the brand power and the reputation that they've earned from having some really high-end phones to shift more units of their lower-end phones. But the A14 is not actually the lowest-end phone Samsung makes. The way this A series works is you have two numbers. The first is the tier of phone we're in, and the second is the generation we're on. Oi, stay away from my Crocs. So for example, last year's phone in the same price tier as this was the Galaxy A13. And a sub to the channel would be a Mazeballs. But Samsung does also have a zero tier. But see, no one wants to have the worst phone. It's actually a very well-documented phenomenon that people, when it comes to anything, are afraid to be the extreme option. They always like to sit somewhere in the middle. There's a sense of comfort that comes from knowing that there are people both above you, who in this case have taken a bigger gamble by spending more money, and also below you, who've got the most basic feature set. It means that so long as you're in between those two extremes, you're cushioned from risk, in a sense. This is why if you ask someone to pick a number between two numbers, they'll be much more likely to pick something in the middle of those two numbers,